So, as we have just unveiled the relationship between the chi-square test or chi-square distribution and the standard normal distribution. Now let's look into the chi-square test in detail by answering by asking the various questions and answering those questions. So we will begin with the first question, which is nothing but which test statistic does it use? So the chi-square test uses the chi-square statistic as the test statistic. So the chi-square is equal to sum of difference between observed minus expected whole square divided by E, which is expected. So chi-square, the test statistic summation, the sum of, and O is observed frequencies and E is expected frequencies, and this is what the test statistic we're gonna use. Then the second question, which distribution does it use? So the chi-square test, the chi-square test uses the chi-square distribution to determine the probability of obtaining the observed chi-square statistic. And this is how it looks. And our chi-square distribution, we have discussed about the chi-square distribution in detail in our previous slide, and we also have understood that there is a clear-cut relationship between the chi-square distribution and the normal distribution. As your degrees of freedom or k keeps on increasing, it's gonna reach out to the chi-square distribution will become the normal distribution. So that's the second question's answer. And the third question, which type of level of measurement or variables this test is applicable to? So the chi-square test is applicable to categorical variables or frequency data. It's commonly used in feature selection in machine learning when analyzing the association or independence between the categorical variables. So next, so which table does it use to calculate calculate the probability? So the chi-square table or the chi-square distribution table is used to calculate the probability associated with the chi-square statistic. However, in practice, this calculation is often performed using statistical software or libraries. So, okay, if that's the case, what all statistical softwares or libraries that are available for us to do the respective operations to do the chi-square test, to execute the chi-square test? Let's begin with the SciPy. So the module SciPy.stats provides the chi-square contingency function for chi-square test of independence and the chi-square function for calculating the chi-square statistic. And the next library that we widely and wisely use with respect to the chi-square test was stats models. Stats models. The module stats models provides the stats dot chi, chi, chi-square probe function to calculate the p-value from the chi-square statistic. So that's what the libraries that we widely use with respect to the Python. And now let's answer the last question, and very important one, because we have answered most of the questions. Now it's time to perform the chi-square test. So first step is to formulate the null hypothesis, which is H sub 0, and alternative hypothesis, which is H sub A, based on the research question. The null hypothesis often states that there is no association or independence between the categorical variables being compared, and that's what is our first step. Then we will move on to the second step. Here we have to organize the data into a contingency table or cross tabulation that represents the observed frequencies or counts in each category. Then the third step is to calculate the chi-square statistic based on the differences between the observed and the expected frequencies under the assumption of independence if testing for independence. So then let's determine the degrees of freedom for the chi-square distribution based on the dimensions of the contingency table. Then let's compare the calculated chi-square statistic with the critical chi-square value from the chi-square table or use a statistical software to obtain the p-value. And the last but not least, so if the p-value is less than the predetermined significance level, which is 0.05, reject the null hypothesis and conclude that there is a statistically significant association or dependency between the categorical variables. And this is what the chi-square test in a nutshell. So it uses chi-square statistic as the test statistic, and it distribution consists of degrees of freedom. As your degrees of freedom increases to 90 or 91, you will become your chi-square distribution will become a normal distribution. And chi-square distribution or chi-square test will be applicable to categorical variables, and after that we can choose the respective chi-square critical value from the table using the even your degrees of freedom. Then from libraries scipy.stats or stats models can be used to execute the respective work. And finally, we have looked into the how to perform the chi-square test on categorical variables, and these steps were also explained in the final question, where how is this test performed.